I entered crypto when I first started, met my fellow co-founders from Polygon, but also started reading about Bitcoin. Really started reading this book called Mastering Bitcoin. Right, like led me into this rabbit hole where I just couldn't get out of. To be very honest, immediately that opportunity came into my mind that Ethereum and Bitcoin had proved the importance of blockchains, but they needed scaling.
Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to the Hash It Over podcast presented to you by the Unchained Summit, which is only a few weeks away, 28th, 29th of April. Make sure to get your tickets. You don't want to miss it out. Just log on to unchainedsummit.com and you'll find all the details, including, tickets, speakers, agenda, and all the other information that you need to know about the Unchained Summit. Now, I'm sitting here with the co-founder of Avail, Anurag Arjun. Thank you for joining us on the show.
Thank you. Pleased to be here.
Now, there's plenty of content out there about how you, as a co-founder of Polygon as well, how you started Polygon and now Avail, which is absolutely tremendous. But I want to know a little bit more about you as a person, growing up in high school, in university, and what really fascinated you about the blockchain industry that made you kind of embark on this journey.
Yeah. No, so I entered the crypto space in 2017. Before that, I actually spent about 11 years in various roles in fintech, regtech, that sort of a thing. Also did a startup before that, right? In general, I came into blockchain from a very financial fintech sort of a lens, right? I was working with fintech for quite some time, and in general, if you look at fintech, it's very siloed in terms of geographical access. Banks are generally strong in one geography. It's regulated by borders really, and so anything. So I initially when I entered crypto when I first started, met my fellow co-founders from Polygon, but also started reading about Bitcoin really, and so that once I started reading this book called Mastering Bitcoin, right, it kind of led me into this rabbit hole where I just couldn't get out of. To be very honest, so I think essentially growing up in India, of course, you. Want to kind of do achieve something. I've always kind of thought of myself as an underdog, so in terms of being able to do things that I have not done before, right?
Right, as an individual.
As an individual, right? So in general, when we saw the opportunity for us to build a product at a global scale with Polygon, which we started in 2017, just reading through Bitcoin, Ethereum, immediately that opportunity came into our mind that Ethereum and Bitcoin had proved the importance of blockchains, but they needed scaling. Ethereum was being clogged by this very funny app called CryptoKitties at the time. I don't think anyone remembers, but you couldn't use Ethereum at that point in time. And we saw the opportunity to kind of build infrastructure that could be global in general, and that's how we really started. Essentially, growing up, to be very honest, I always wanted to do something big in
Tech.
software, tech in general, because I don't really come from a very privileged background, right? I come from a very middle class sort of a background. And in general, what I believe is that software is a big equalizer in the sense that you don't really need capital to create a manufacturing plant or something like that, right? You can just write code, market the software, and you can make a big impact, right? So I thought that was the easiest way to do it, and then spent a lot of years in like understanding finance, fintech, that sort of a thing,
Right.
and that gave me the good mental model to approach blockchains.
Now, you spoke about this book that was kind of like your early days, your entry into the whole crypto and blockchain industry. Was there any person that you've kind of looked up to or like a mentor in the blockchain industry when you first started off?
I think like Andreas Antonopoulos, who's basically the guy who wrote Mastering Bitcoin. He was actually a very big proponent of Bitcoin and later Ethereum as well. He's not very active nowadays, but like essentially he played a big role. I mean, I watched ton of his videos at that point in time, and that made me really understand Bitcoin and Ethereum. Like I would say for anyone entering the space, understanding Bitcoin, understanding the Ethereum initially is very important to get a very holistic purpose way of like framing this, because crypto today is has become very complex. Like when I entered, it wasn't that complex. You could understand systems from end to end. Now like of course it's very complex, but you still like there's tremendous value in just understanding why Bitcoin works, why Ethereum worked at that point in time, and then build your mental model. Of course like crypto in general also forces you to understand how the world works, like in general.
That's true. That's very true.
Yeah.
You look at the world differently.
Very differently. So I mean, most people don't even want to understand how a bank works, how the monetary system from the government works, how money is printed, what is inflation. Like in crypto, like I always kind of like to say that crypto is a microcosm of the world, right? Like I mean, you can literally see what is happening on chain. You can see who are the greedy people, who are the scammy people, who like who are the honest people who really want to make an impact, right? Like so I mean it's a reflection of the world, right? Like I mean it's just the main difference is the scale is small, but you can see what's happening on chain, for example, and so on. So it opens up your mind, really. Like you kind of understand what a bank does, like how your money is getting inflated, for example, and so on. So a lot of things make sense that way. And then like of course like we are always in this speculation bubble for now, but in general there is tremendous impact that is blockchains are going to make to traditional systems very soon.
Now, you have probably built one of the biggest projects out there, Polygon, right? You co-founded Polygon, and then you moved on into starting off Avail. Now, was that because you found a gap, whether in the market or Polygon itself, or was it more of a complementary product on top of Polygon?
So okay, so I think maybe zooming out, like maybe I'll try to explain what Avail's goals are really, right? Like I mean, essentially, so if we kind of start with, let's say, Bitcoin and Ethereum, right? Like so these were one of the first blockchains, right? Bitcoin was literally the first blockchain, and Ethereum was one of the first general purpose blockchains. All of these started as these very monolithic sort of structures, right? Like so you have like a node, thousands of people run the node. And then like validation happens, and then you get a transaction processed, for example, right? Like so that is how I would say the first generation of blockchains really started. Then of course like there were improvements made to that, right? Like which like you can see like Binance Smart Chain, for example, or like Phantom, and all the way coming down to now a Solana, an Aptos, or a Sui, for example. So these are all examples of like monolithic sort of chains. Like you have one chain. And these are all improvements on what a Bitcoin or Ethereum did, like make it big fat chain, make it parallelizable, make block times very small, for example, and so on, right? Like so that's the logical
generic features.
Yeah. Now around 2017 2018, right, like when we started Polygon, we actually started something called with something called Plasma, which was a layer 2 solution of Ethereum, right? Like, and there and of course the spiritual successor to Plasma is something called rollups that you can hear about. Like a base is a rollup, optimism is a rollup, arbitrum is a rollup, and these are like what the term rollup really means is that like instead of kind of making your single chain big fat chain, for example, or able to handle more transactions. You kind of, so that's an example of like generally in web tech terminology, it's called vertical scaling. Like you kind of improve the performance of the underlying blockchain. Plasma and then rollups, for example, are an example of horizontal scaling. So instead of doing everything on one chain, you kind of add more and more chains, so that ultimately that you can service a lot of users and transactions. So that's really like what people refer to as the rollup centric roadmap, or things like that. So instead of, so if you kind of look at Ethereum, now there are probably 100 plus layer 2 chains. So like Optimism, Polygon, zk Sync, Starkware, Arbitrum, Scroll, so on. And so that's the way I believe that like we are going to get to, if blockchain has to go to population scale sort of transactions, you have to do it in a horizontally scaled manner. Now the problem with how Ethereum's gone about it really was that it started off with a very scalability sort of a play. Like in around 2020, Ethereum pivoted to, or 2019 pivoted to what is called the rollup centric roadmap. That's why you have now these like culminating, like if you see the last 2-3 years, hundreds of rollups launching. But because Ethereum began from a very monolithic sort of a route, they've been changing their roadmap. Of course, it's also very expensive to kind of do these changes on a chain which has about $300 billion in value, right? Like it's very risky to change it,
100%.
upgrade it, right? Like, so they've been deliberate in doing these changes. But what has happened is now you have like this, it's a horizontally scaled solution. So you have scalability because you can do transactions on any of these chains and they are able to handle the load. But they're all fragmented. Like you still have to kind of think about how to, if you have assets on base, how do you go to Arbitrum? So you have bridges, but it's like it's still like it fragments liquidity and so on. So the actual end goal of this architecture is like this has to be like, there has to be a lot of chains, but they have to be very seamlessly connected, without which like this thing cannot work, right? Like that's why like Solana is enjoying their day under the sun, for example. But the problem with Solana is very good tech, right? Like they've done very good development. But in general, like if you even look at like a Trump or a Melania launch, launch, right? Like I mean, it was pretty congested, right? Like I mean, even you and people not able to put in orders, for example, right? Like, and so that really proves the thesis that like any one single chain, no matter how fast, performant, parallelized it is, it's not going to handle any sort of population real world kind of load, right? Like we are not even in that stage where we have like more than maybe 50 million or 100 million people actually actively transacting. Like the actual numbers are pretty low. So if this were to actually if we want to kind of disrupt, let's say, payment flows or like private credit flows or lending flows, for example, in the real world, it requires a lot more like scale, robustness, connectivity, so on and so forth. And I believe the only thing is to do this in a very horizontally scaled manner, like more chains but seamlessly connected. So that was the vision that actually we started Avail with really back in 2020. We started Avail back in 2020 inside of Polygon. And at the time, like at Polygon, we were developing something called the ZK EVM, which is the ZK rollup. So in general, like we looked at what Ethereum was going to do. We looked at, like what we were at Polygon at the time going to do. And I really thought that, like you need this new kind of L1 that's not really doing any smart contracts, that doesn't do any sort of, execution. Like it's basically a base layer that is exclusively focused on horizontal scaling of supporting rollups. So to kind of have as many rollups as possible, as many chains as possible, but to have them seamlessly connected. So when we talk about Avail, I think a lot of people think about it in data availability terms. Like data availability is one piece of the puzzle. Data availability provides...
That's the core of
Yeah,
of
that's
the
the
project.
foundational part, which we of course work for a number of years, and like we've released it on production last year. But the intent of or the goals are to kind of course provide scale, but also provide like this seamless interconnectivity. So what I'm talking about is we are releasing a demo of this pretty soon. We actually released like a um, internal demo few weeks back, but what we want to do is kind of abstract that user experience, so that for example, if you have assets on a base or a Solana, for example, or on Arbitrum, for example, and if you want to do a transaction on, say, let's say a Sophon or a Lens chain that is upcoming for now, you shouldn't be having to switch RPCs, switch chains, bridge tokens, and so on. Like, you can just do it in one click. And so what we really want to enable with this whole infrastructure, with DA, with like our upcoming Nexus upgrade, for example, is this experience, right? Today, like if you look at app devs, like someone like Aave, for example. Aave is this industry leading protocol. It has probably around 25-30 billion dollars in TVL today. It operates about 12 or 13 instances of Aave on different chains. So you have an Aave Ethereum, you have an Aave Base, you have an Aave Arbitrum, and so on.
Yeah.
And it's literally the same code, the same protocol, everything is the same, right? Like, but the team has to maintain 12, 13 different instances. The reason is because they don't want to lose out on users for that particular chain.
Okay.
Right? And because like if Aave is not present on a particular chain, then the users have to come bridge to the supported chain, for example, and it's a lot of friction. So they had this strategy then to kind of deploy this and maintain these multiple deployments. In traditional tech, you don't do this, right? Like, I mean, essentially, your app is deployed maybe on distributed servers, but the user doesn't need to know, really. Like, I mean, TikTok must have thousands of servers at the backend, but the user just has one TikTok app, right?
That's
like,
true.
And so what we really want to enable is this experience of like, let's say someone like an Aave or any other app, for example, just deploying on one venue, one chain, and users from any other chain being able to access it in a one click, for example.
Okay. Fair enough. What's the story behind the name Avail? Who came up with that?
Yeah. I mean, in general, like when we started out, right? Like to be very honest, we didn't spend a lot of time thinking about it. It just naturally came from the data availability, the availability sort of a thing. But we thought like Avail was a cool name,
Okay.
and it just stuck around, right? Like, I mean, essentially, and it's not pretty bad.
Yeah, it's cool. It's kind of easy to
Yeah.
memorize. How do you envision Avail contributing to the unification of Web3 today?
In general, see, as I've been talking about this, right? Like, I mean, essentially, what we really want to enable with our upcoming Nexus upgrade is, like we've already with our DA layer, we've been, kind of onboarding a lot of chains. We already have Sophon, we have, like Lens, a very big chain launching now. And we have 50 other chains that will launch this year. Now, each chain essentially, has this a problem of bootstrapping their liquidity, bootstrapping their TVL, getting exchange connections, like bunch of stuff like that, right? Like, so with our upcoming Nexus upgrade, what we want to really do is make that job much easier, right? Like, so in general, because all of these are connected with one click access, even if one chain from this has exchange connections, has a Oracle, has a industry leading DEX, for example, has liquidity, for example, each of these chains can access that chain's liquidity, for example. So, I mean, to give a concrete example, so if there's a new chain, it's a gaming chain, for example, and they want to like, let's say user has probably ETH or Sol or USDT, for example, and the user wants to swap a token to play the game, for example. I mean, before they would have to have like a DEX with deep liquidity for the user to be able to kind of like swap the
Swap,
token
yeah.
with minimal slippage.
Mm-hmm.
This will change to just going to the best chain in the network in general, whichever has the deepest liquidity. The swap can happen and the tokens can flow back without the user having to go through the mental
Okay.
load of bridging or so on and so forth.
Right.
So yeah, we want to get to that experience, right? Essentially users able to access apps on most chains that we support.
For the average person watching this video right now, could you explain in very simple terms how data availability works in Avail? In very simple terms, maybe using an example.
Yeah. I mean, in general, the thing is that data availability is of course a very low level infrastructure primitive. Most people don't even really have to understand it, but I'll try my level best in explaining this, right? So when you're doing like a trade, for example, on let's say on a stock exchange, for example, doesn't matter. The same thing applies to a crypto exchange as well, but when you're doing this, you're submitting trades to a stock exchange, for example, and there are thousands of other traders also doing that. Now, who decides what is the ordering of these transactions, right? So you put in a transaction which is favorable to you. Who orders that? Who orders the transaction? Who says this is not, or transaction? This has to be executed in this order, right? That's the exchange.
Mm-hmm.
In case of the stock exchange, centralized exchange, it's the stock exchange. Now, there is a lot of possibility that your order can be deprioritized. For example, I mean, you want to, let's say, enter at a certain price. For example, someone sees the order and kind of front runs you, for example. So I'm still saying complex things, but essentially the ordering of the transactions, right, as they come, has an important effect of the actual outcome. So for example, if you wanted to buy it, let's say simple, you want to buy a stock at, let's say, some X value. Some trader can kind of snipe this, for example, at that rate, and you won't get that rate, for example. So
Okay.
ordering matters. Everything in blockchains is ordering. Like in traditional tech products, there is a centralized entity doing the ordering.
Yeah.
In blockchains, because it's kind of decentralized, the ordering is done by various parties. For example, data availability, like the word is very it's very confusing. In general, a lot of people think it's about data storage or something like that. It's not really any of this.
Okay.
It's essentially ordering of the data. Like basically, when users send transactions to any blockchain, right? Like, what is the ordering? What has the ordering been committed to? And what is the guarantee that this ordering will not be reverted?
Right. Okay.
Like that is really all that data availability really guarantees.
Yeah.
And if you see any blockchain, that's the core of any blockchain. Like if you go to a Bitcoin or Ethereum, like users submit transactions, there is something called a block producer, for example, who kind of produces a block. What is that block? Block is a set of ordered or prioritized transactions. Now, who decides that order? It is the block builder. In Bitcoin, there's a complex proof of work game that decides who builds the block, for example. In other systems, there is, like proof of stake systems, for example, and different consensus algorithms based on proof of stake. But really, everything is about ordering. Like, because whoever handles the ordering, because the execution part is basically is just a function, mathematical function on top of what is the transaction. In regular payments, it's not very very important, but once you go beyond payments, like swaps, for example, all of this become very important. That's the reason why HFT firms in traditional tech, for example, keep servers co-located to the exchange so that they have a few millisecond sort of advantage, for example, and so on. So a lot of these things happen, but Anyways, zooming out, like
still not so simple, but yeah, maybe for you, not for the average listener out there. Now, there's a lot of DA solution competitors in the market out there, Celestia, Eigenlayer, and so on. What makes you guys different as Avail? What makes you guys stand out?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the focus of a lot of these players, like in general. So, see, when the market frames this as a DA category, for example, Ethereum main product to rollups is the DA that they have, for example. So, the first DA product, for example, was Ethereum. But we don't look at Ethereum like that, right? Like Ethereum is the DA part. It's also the execution and all the rollups on top, for example. So focusing on just the DA part is just looking at one part of it, right? It's actually the overall DA is essentially gives you scale. Just scale. Focusing on scale is basically just one part of the puzzle, right? Like I said on Ethereum, it has led to a very fragmented experience with hundreds of L2s. So if you just look at solving DA, right? For Ethereum rollups, it's a very it's just looking at one thing, not the overall picture. In terms of differences between other competitors like Celestia, EigenDA, for example, right? So there are of course technical differences. Celestia implements their thing using something called fraud proofs. We use something called validity proofs or ZK proofs, for example. EigenDA is like a committee-based solution, for example, and so on. But I think the major difference is not in just the technical differences. The major difference is in what is the end goal, right? What we are doing is DA is one part of the foundational part of what we do, but the idea is, again, as I am going back, right? We want to have this horizontally scalable chain architecture. Ultimately, it should lead to users having this experience of doesn't matter which chain I am on, for example, I'm able to transact with any app that I want to in this fragmented ecosystem, right? So I think that is something that only we focus on, not the other competitors. On Ethereum also, a lot of efforts are starting in general. So the OP guys are doing something, for example. The ZK Sync guys are doing. Polygon is doing. So those are all very Ethereum specific solutions. So we kind of go beyond.
Apart from tech, what drives a user into Avail, Celestius, or any of the other kind of chains out there?
Yeah. So I'll try to explain, right? In general, see, all of this is Avail,
maybe marketing.
Yeah. No. So I'll just try to explain from the role of where we kind of fit in, right? So today what we have in production, which is our DA specific blockchain, that our main customers are rollups or chains that we want to build on top of it, right? So we have Sophon, we have Lens, we have 50 other chains. So our product today caters to these rollups. Then kind of basically market to app devs, users. So someone like a Lens will kind of who's building a open social media protocol will target social apps, for example, and so on, right? Like a Sophon will target gaming apps, for example. We have a few DEX order book exchanges coming. We have DeFi chains coming. We have AI agent-based apps chains coming. So these chains then enable app devs and users to use, right? So today, Avail, we don't really market to app devs and users today with our what is there on production. With our upcoming Nexus upgrade, which is the more connecting chains sort of an upgrade, right? What we kind of provide is a very easy to use software development kit that app devs can use to simplify user experiences, for example. So we are a very you can think of us as a very infrastructure B2B sort of a company,
right?
In general. Having said that, we've because my personal roots are in fintech, regtech, that sort of a thing. We've been doing a lot of tokenization sort of initiatives in general. Like we've been working with a lot of like real world TradFi companies to onboard them for various use cases like private credit, tokenized treasuries, and so on. So there is a RWA chain called Root that is that is soon going to launch. That is tokenizing a lot of real world assets there. And so those will be some of the applications. So I mean, you can think of Avail not as like the Avail ecosystem as like a user facing app facing kind of a thing, like very similar to Ethereum, where like you have an Arbitrum, you have a like a Optimism, for example. And so Arbitrum, so we work with Arbitrum, Optimism, Polygon, Starkware, ZK Sync, Scroll. All of these have,
I mean, these are partners.
yeah, these are partners that, and a lot of chains use their stack to create new rollups, for example, on Avail.
Yeah. You spoke earlier about, I mean, the development side of things is also the core and the foundation of Avail. What do you guys do as an initiative to the developers community out there to kind of, incite them into the whole Avail ecosystem and help them to be a part of this network?
Yeah. So
with the apps that you just spoke about, you provide a certain kind of kit for them to come and help develop the product.
See, I think now that I've spent like about 8 years in the industry, right? Like, I mean, I think, of course, like we do a lot of developer relations activity. Like we do a bunch of hackathons, for example. We just finished the hacker house at a very intimate hacker house at ETH Denver, for example. And so we do, online hackathons, office hours, that sort of a thing, right? Like, but I think really the important thing that I've kind of realized is essentially to kind of like build more and more awareness on what powerful use cases that you can really build with blockchains, right? Like, because see, if you kind of look at, of course, we have a like a catchment of developers, of Web3 developers, for example, that already know blockchains, what they can do, for example. But there's just too many developers who are not working in blockchains in Web3, for example. And when we talk to them, right, like, I mean, it's like like AI is going to be the next big thing. I'm going to build something with AI, for example, and so on. And in the same manner that AI captures the imagination of a lot of developers, like blockchains for the moment are not kind of like igniting that passion, for example. So of course, like there's a bunch of things that we are doing on enabling DeFi use cases, gaming use cases, social use cases, tokenizing use cases, for example. But I think in general, we have to, what we are focusing on is really kind of like doing a little bit more to enable more real world like firms to kind of interact with this platform. And that you have to build a bunch of stuff to kind of like make that easy. Like someone sitting in a mid-market private credit firm like doesn't really want to learn Solidity and stuff like that. So they don't want their users like navigating different chains, for example. So I like to see ourselves as like, if you, and I like to give the example of Apple Pay, right? Like, I mean, with Apple Pay, for example, you kind of go to a shop, like you can just scan your phone to or tap to pay, essentially, like now from the user perspective, it's something that's a very easy experience that gets done in seconds, for example. But just take a bit to understand the kind of infrastructure that is required to pull that off, right? Like, I mean, you need like infrastructure on the payment processor level, at the bank level, at the credit card level, at the merchant level, for example. So there's a lot of back and forth happening.
100%. That people are not aware of, and they're not necessarily interested. All they care about is the end result.
Exactly. So in general, what I'm trying to, I don't mean in any way that users should be knowing all of that. The purpose of infrastructure developers like us is to build all this excellent infra, but hide it away from the end users, so that ultimately we have Apple Pay like experiences for customers.
But this is why people go with products such as Apple Pay, because it's trusted. And why is it trusted? Because they've built an amazing tech and ecosystem behind it. So I guess this is what everybody strives for, to gain the trust of end users, especially if you're doing a B2C business model.
Yeah, absolutely.
How does the Avail token help with the, because we spoke a lot about the development, the tech behind it, all the boring stuff. Well, for a lot of people, not for you. How does the Avail token come into place and help with the overall ecosystem?
Yeah, I mean, I think as I said, right, like the Avail ecosystem, ultimately, where we want the Avail ecosystem to go is essentially this set of chains or ecosystem of chains that have interesting apps across categories like like social, gaming, DeFi, AI, tokenization, and so on, right? Like, and for users to be able to have excellent UX experiences, like, I mean, essentially one-click experiences, like. They don't have to think about downloading N wallets, switching RPCs, switching bridges. So everything that we build is in the service of great UX on the user side, right? Like now to power all of that, of course, we have a lot of infrastructure components, right? Like, I mean, essentially. So of course the token powers staking and fees paid by rollups, for example, but it also powers this connectivity, like the interop between these chains, which is hidden away from the user. But when the user does a transaction, like for example today, like let me kind of give you an example. So if you want to, let's say, buy a meme coin on Solana, for example, today, and you have funds on an exchange, so what you have to do is you have to kind of first like withdraw to a wallet. If you don't have a wallet, you have to install that, for example. Then you also, if it's like USDC, USDT, for example, buy Solana as well in general, and then you get to buy, right?
There's 2 to 3 transactions.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
In general, our thesis is that we can basically bring that down to one interaction, right? Like, I mean, of course, there are multiple steps happening in the backend, but the user doesn't need to know.
Okay.
Right? Like,
is this ultimately the goal of Avail?
Yes, that is the goal of Avail. Right?
Simplify, data to end users.
Yeah. I mean, as simple as like I discussed about TikTok, for example, right? Like TikTok or any other big app, right? Like we'll have like hundreds or thousands of servers all across the world, right? Like, but to the user doesn't matter, right? Like user just has to install one app, and they can like access everything. You have, let's say, there's a team that is building something like a super app on top of Avail's infra that basically like enables one-click access on most apps that you want to use, for example. So you don't even need to kind of like go to these different websites, go to different wallets, for example, go to different chains, right? Like you can just have. So ultimately the goal is to kind of make it dead easy for users to use all of this complex infra. This infra is complex, right? Like, I mean, no doubt about it.
Yeah.
But what we want to, like, we build a lot of complex infra. We build data availability sampling, like interop rails, so on and so forth. But everything is in the service of that. And the token, like, I mean, when like you want to do, if your assets are on Base, you want to do something on Solana or on Arbitrum, for example, or on Sophon or Lens, for example, all of this backend infra is coordinated by the Avail token, for example, right? Like, I mean, fees that, like you don't need to pay fees on the destination chain, for example.
Okay.
Like we just deduct fees on the source chain.
Right.
But all of that backend settlement is done via the Avail token, for example.
Right. What are some real world kind of use cases that you envision for Avail in the very near future?
Yeah. I think there's of course a lot of B2C use cases that I anticipate will come, but it will take a little bit more time. I think initially the most traction that we are seeing is from more B2B sort of use cases, which is basically more on the tokenization side in general. So we are seeing a lot of interest from institutional firms, traditional financial institutions, to kind of use blockchains as sort of a settlement layer. Like basically, as I mentioned before, right? Like fintech, traditional finance is very country specific, very siloed.
Yeah.
For example, and how I think this is about is, in a very similar way to how Amazon made a marketplace of products and services across the world, right? Like, I mean, today you are able to kind of order a product of from Dubai, from China, from the US, anywhere, and it will be here maybe in couple of days or maybe couple of weeks, for example. But it happens, right? Like you don't need to think too much about payment, shipment, that sort of
Nothing.
thing. Nothing.
Yeah.
How can we do that for financial services, for example? How can we kind of enable companies, like maybe there's a company in UK providing private credit, for example, right? Like, I mean, let's say lending some money, like a borrower. We have actually a customer who's doing that right now, which basically you can get a 10% yield on top of a loan, which they collateralize it against a London property that the borrower owns, for example, right? Now that, how can we make that accessible to a customer in the UAE or in Singapore or in Switzerland or like in any other place, right? Like today, you have to, like unless you are very rich, you have a family office and all of that is done, right? You can't really access those opportunities, for example. There are some options where you can buy US stocks, for example, and so on, but like you cannot collateralize that share, for example. So we are initially looking at some of these use cases, which are right now more B2B, more accredited investors sort of. But then once we kind of perfect this, we will go downstream in general. We already have something like Lens, for example, which is a more B2C sort of a use case where, like if you look at Twitter, for example, or Instagram, like wonderful social media platforms, but from a monetization perspective, like it's very hard to make money on Instagram or on TikTok, for example. Like it's always like off chain that you do a lot of deals with brands, with influencers.
Are you talking about from a customer point of view or from a business point of view?
Basically from an influencer point of view. Let's make it from a
But
user
they've
point
started.
of view.
But they've started compensating influencers minimal. But
Minimal. Minimal, right? Like I mean, essentially
compared to the impact that they have on the app.
Exactly, right? Like I mean, so of course, like there are these but like if you look at Twitter, for example, like the moment Elon Musk kind of bought Twitter, they closed the API off. Facebook, if you remember a few years back, right? Like I mean, they had like a very thriving app ecosystem on top. If you remember, Zynga was a big company that was building games on top of Facebook, Farmville, and a bunch of other apps.
I remember.
And one fine day, Facebook said, they're encroaching into our space. Let's just cut them out, and they stopped the access to the API for anyone. You don't have too much access to the API now. Twitter, same. Like once Elon Musk came in, once the acquisition went through, it's prohibitively expensive. Like you cannot really use Twitter API feeds, for example. And kind of if you kind of look at, like zoom out a bit, for example, Twitter today has replaced most news sources, for example, right? Like news happens on Twitter.
On Twitter.
Not on, like news.
It's like a marketplace for news.
Yeah, exactly. And so if it is becoming that, and if you cannot access the data apart from the app or that, right? Like I mean, you cannot participate in the Twitter economy, to be very honest. And so Lens is that kind of a experiment or a initiative that that wants to foster these kind of open social tools, right? Like of course it's very not that easy to take on Twitter or Instagram or Facebook, but like there are these niche communities that are sprouting up, especially on the influencer side, for example, on the artist side, for example, and so on. So I think that's going to be becoming much more important. In general, on Sophon, for example, there's a bunch of gaming DeFi activity that is happening in general. So lots of stuff happening.
Okay, that's cool. Speaking of lots of stuff happening, I'm sure there's a lot in the pipeline for Avail. Now, this podcast is presented by the Unchained Summit. It's happening on the 28th, 29th of April right here in Dubai for the very first time. You're going to be a part of it as well. Normally I'm sure you've done a couple of those. What do you normally enjoy doing more for kind of like a keynote or be a part of a panel discussion, a fireside chat? And what do you usually talk about? Do you prepare for such things? Do you have like news to kind of announce on these kind of conferences, if you will?
No, I do do a lot of talks and
Do you just
panels.
freestyle it?
No, it's not like that. Like, I do a lot of talks and panels throughout the year. Like after this, I am off to the next month. I'm off to Hong Kong for the Web3 festival, also for Build Asia in Korea as well. So you have this Solana events in Istanbul at the end of April, for example. So I'm all speaking there, talking on panels, so on and so forth. Panels generally I don't do too much prep, right? Like it's very extempore. Like depends on who the speakers are, what are they discussing.
This is a panel of some sort, yeah.
Exactly. Talks, essentially, it depends on what the context is at that point in time. So we generally prepare pitch like a deck, for example, and so on, based on what the audience really wants. But sometimes it's about our product, sometimes it's about overall developments that are happening, shifts that are happening in the industry, how we are seeing it, that sort of a thing.
Okay, that's cool. Now we're going to move on into some fun questions, right?
Okay.
If you could have any superpower related to blockchain technology, what would it be?
Superpower related to, essentially, I think this is maybe like a very naive sort of answer, but I just want basically the ability to kind of explain blockchains to more and more people, right? Like at least people in decision making places.
Okay.
Because really, this industry, we've been kind of building a lot of infra, building a lot of tech, right? Like, and it's state of the art. Like, to be very honest, blockchains are just ledgers. Like, the world runs on ledgers. Like, everything is a ledger. Like, the Dubai government runs on ledgers. There's a land ledger, there's a citizen ledger.
Mm-hmm.
Everything runs on ledger, for example. Banks run on ledgers. Each business runs on ledgers. They have their own systems and they're recording what is happening, who to pay what to, who did what, for example. All of these are ledgers. Blockchains are just basically ledgers. Like we are in the business of ledgers. Now the difference between what company ledgers, government ledgers and blockchains are, like basically who has right access into the ledger. Like in a company generally, like the company has the exclusive right to write into the ledger, for example. So if you send a transaction to a bank, the bank then updates your balance, for example. If you kind of buy a property in UAE, for example, the government writes into their ledger that you bought the property. Blockchain is different in the sense that, like it kind of...
You mean they do that manually?
They have exclusive right.
Okay, to access these.
To write into the ledger, right? Like writing into the ledger. Like I cannot write into the Dubai land registry
100%,
ledger, for example, right? Like so I cannot write I cannot update my balance in the bank, for example, and so on. The blockchains is basically, like it's just a different way of maintaining a ledger. Instead of one person, one party maintaining that ledger, it's like a series of set of participants who people we don't know, but like because of the magic of maths and cryptography, we are able to kind of come to consensus on what should be written into the ledger, and that is a very powerful change in the way things are done, right? Like when things are going well, doesn't matter, right? Like if the government is honest, for example, if the bank is honest, doesn't matter. But we've seen all around in the world that lots of things can go wrong in terms of writing to the ledger. Second thing is basically, if you kind of look at it again, like I try to look at it from a more systems point of view, right? Like you have the stock exchange systems, for example. They're used explicitly. We have built purpose-built systems for trading stocks. They cannot trade bonds. They cannot trade mutual funds. They cannot trade treasuries. They cannot trade ETFs. Blockchains are this, like very general purpose ledger technology where you can do tokenized stocks, tokenized bonds, tokenized treasuries. Like it's the same infra. Like on a Uniswap, a token is a token, right? Like it can be anything. It can be USDC, it can be Tesla stock, it can be anything really. So it eliminates the requirement for purpose built infra. Like once you kind of tap into, like let's assume that, let's say a traditional financial institution integrates with the blockchain, it immediately has access to all the other players on the blockchain, for example, and it can mix and match things, and that can lead to, because today if you want to do that, right, like if you have to kind of like basically systems have to integrate via something called APIs, and that is like a very 1:1 contract sort of a thing, for example. Like all of this, like I understand this not basically so I think one failure of the blockchain industry in general has been, including ourselves, has been in not being able to educate the right people on this, and that's what we are kind of like ultra focused on. How can we take this technology to a place which is understood by better people so that it can actually get into the real world, start being used, for example, and so on.
Speaking of that, do you believe that like blockchain in general is still at the very early stages?
It is. Like essentially, I think until a few years ago, we didn't really solve the scalability problem. Like I mean, that's only been solved from about a few years, and we are still getting to solving interoperability problems, right? Like I mean, in general, like fragmentation issues, UX issues, for example, and so on. And in general, like how do we kind of like it's a general lack of imagination within the industry in general of what this stuff is useful for, right? Like I mean, so we have some great products. We have stable coins in general, and we have a bunch of other things that we've done, but largely like because of the monetary nature of the industry, like a lot of effort goes into speculation, trading, that sort of a thing, right? Like which is useful for growing the industry up to a point, right? Like beyond that, it has to show utility. Otherwise, like industry dies in general. So I think basically, I think the tide is turning now, right? Like especially with like President Trump in power, for example, and he's calling for like just today I was reading a tweet where like they passed a bill for stablecoin regulation, for example. And they're doing a bunch of other things like and whatever the US does, a lot of countries will like kind of follow. And so I think that is going to happen. The players who have been entered in this industry will of course benefit from that, but make no mistake that like once BlackRock comes in, once like an NYSE, and
they are coming in.
So it will like they bring what a lot of the players in the industry don't have, which is distribution. Like anything that has distribution will get momentum in general, right? Like I mean, so yeah, I agree that we are early, but we have to like be very aggressive.
If you were to go back in time before you even kind of co-founded Polygon, would you have done like anything differently?
I probably like in Polygon, what happened is like we grew too fast around 2021 ish. Like we grew very fast. We kind of, and these are all like organizational things in general. So we grew to about 500 people in 2021, 2022.
500 people as a like team? Oh,
the
okay.
Polygon
Wow.
team. So that was certainly a mistake. We grew too fast. We hired too much, and so the organization became slow to move. So that was one thing. But in general, like I mean, that always happens with fast-growing startups, right? Like
Oh.
from an industry perspective, I think like in general, we and us also, we make the mistake of kind of working on creating this perfect infra, spending a lot on building this robust infra
Mm-hmm.
rather than just kind of starting with MVPs to kind of target these like let's say great UX experiences, for example, for the user and so on. And so of course like absolutely need this infra, but you also need to be kind of doing more and more to attract the like the next set of users, for example, right? Like I won't say targeting the 1 billion next 1 billion, because that's going to take some time. Like basically the next set of users we have to kind of attract, and that has to be with like more than just speculation.
Did you envision any of that success? Or were you the type of person that will just focus on what you do best, put in the work, and then whatever results come out of it will be great? Or did you actually envision the success that you have right now?
So to be honest, like I always knew that I would end up doing something successful. Like I mean, I would
Okay.
that belief I always had. Like I would like end up doing something big. But in general, like I have this very consistent belief that like there is no thing like this, the right place and the right time, right? Like you have to sufficiently be in the right place for a sufficiently long time, so that when the right time comes, that you are there to gain the benefits, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
I mean, and that is something I believe very fervently, that you have to kind of like pick your spot, based on your understanding of how the industry is going, how things are evolving, how the world is evolving, and you have to pick, and you have to kind of like be at it. And because everything is based on timing, to be very honest, you can do all the hard work that you want to do, but timing matters. Like when we did Polygon, it became a success in retrospective, because like at that time there were very few scaling solutions. Like in general, Ethereum was very slow in general, and at the time the only competition was some project called XDAI, for example. So timing matters. Like if we had released Polygon POS today, it wouldn't have been that kind of a success.
One last question. You spoke earlier about Dubai government. Do you guys, and I know that blockchain has been recently used or integrated a lot within governments in general. And I know that Dubai government, regardless whether it's the land department or any other department, they're very pro blockchain. Have you guys had any like conversations with certain entities in Dubai that wanting to kind of integrate blockchain into their ecosystem?
Yeah, we haven't talked to directly to the Dubai government for now, but we hope to, for example. But yeah, for sure, we've been having a lot of conversations.
Especially when it comes to data, that's like a very kind of important thing.
Yeah.
City is rapidly growing.
Yeah.
A lot of people are coming in, calling it home. So
Yeah. No, for sure. I mean, bunch of companies that we talk to in like Abu Dhabi, like Abu Dhabi has this nice innovation center, for example, and a bunch of other companies who operate from here. We've been kind of like talking to working with them, for example, to integrate like stuff, especially on the tokenization side, right? Like I mean, I think we've been also talking to a few financial institutions like traditional banks and stuff like that. They've been also very helpful. Like everyone has an innovation arm that wants to try out something. So I would say like on in specifically on Dubai side, like lot of interest, but it's slightly early. Everyone is doing pilots, for example, and so on.
There's definitely an appetite for it. That's
There's an
for sure.
appetite. There's an appetite for it, like for sure. I think Abu Dhabi has very clear laws on things like stable coins and like
I
things
mean,
like
yesterday, huge news, the investment in Binance,
that.
2 billion.
Yeah. For sure.
Yeah.
So I mean I think there's like a few startups that Mubadala is also investing in, for example, in crypto, for example, and of course, the Binance thing is pretty huge. But in general, it's a very like the outlook is very forward looking in general.
Absolutely.
So I think, as with government, things take a little time. So, but I'm hoping in the next couple of years, like we will have a lot of activity here.
Well, Anurag, thank you very much for your time. Thank you
Yeah.
for coming into the Block by Block podcast.
Yeah.
And we're looking forward to seeing you at the Unchained Summit, 28th or 29th of April. I don't know if the schedule is out yet, but either that or the 29th. Anything that you want to say to everybody watching, maybe on this camera right now, before we call it a day?
No, I mean, in general, like um, we've at Avail, what we really want to, as I've been talking through this podcast, right? Like we really want to make blockchains as easy to use as like one-click app experiences, and that's what we build a lot of complex infra. All of this is in the service of great UX for the app side, and we just want blockchains to be easy to use, so that like the regular person on the road should be able to kind of use it without even knowing they are using it, for example.
If anyone would like to get in touch with you, where are you mostly active?
I'm pretty active on Twitter. My
Okay.
handle is Anurag ANURAGARJUN on Twitter. Like, feel free to DM on Twitter. Like I mostly reply.
Only serious inquiries. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Anurag, co-founder of Avail. And thank you guys for watching the Hash It Over podcast, presented to you by the Unchained Summit, coming to Dubai for the very first time. Just imagine all of this information that you've gained, all the knowledge and expertise from Anurag. You're going to have tons of that on the day of the event. So make sure to get your tickets. Log on to unchainedsummit.com for all the details. And I'll see you on the next session.